After that, another father came to me, and he was Hispanic, and I had two problems representing him. I thought the judge was discriminating against him because of his national origin, and I thought she was discriminating against him because of his gender. And it was a very difficult case. The father was a good guy, and the mother had problems. And while under the influence of drugs and alcohol, she smashed up the vehicle she was driving, causing permanent brain damage to their little baby boy. The boy ended up in Cook County Hospital, permanent brain damage, will never walk again. When I was in court, the judge initially would not transfer the child to my client. She refused to award custody to that father. And what I heard was a father. It was very difficult. I eventually was able to convince the judge to transfer temporary possession of the child to the father without prejudice to a full hearing, which meant when the child was released from Cook County Hospital, disabled, permanently brain damaged, never able to walk again, the child will be placed in the custody of the father. But she wouldn't use the word custody. Possession was as far as she would go. And then, as I was walking out of the courtroom, she looked at me and she bellowed, "Counselor," she said, "Leving, I want the mother in rehab. I want her off drugs and alcohol. And when she's better, I want that child returned it's really he, not she, was a little boy. And I want that child returned to mom. Do you understand me, counselor?" And I said, "Yes, I understand you," and I basically shoved my client out of the courtroom because he was in tears and he was outraged, and I couldn't have him start fighting with the judge because she would have probably reversed herself. So these are some of the problems that I've been confronted with. And it's difficult for these dads out there. It's very, very difficult. I represented one man, and I'm going to go from family law to the criminal arena because they are very closely intertwined in one respect. Justice sometimes is a luxury, and it should never be a luxury only the rich can afford. And I experienced that. At 26th in California, there was one judge that thought all African American males were guilty of something. So if you had a criminal case in front of this judge, you couldn't win. Your client was gone. So you had to file a motion for a substitution of judges. Some lawyers wouldn't do that because they didn't want to get the judge angry. So if they didn't want to get the judge angry, their client would probably end up going to prison, even if he was innocent. There was another judge there, Pincham, who was the complete opposite. He thought everyone was innocent. So he was a great judge to be in front of. I had one criminal defendant in front of him. I thought there's no way I could win this trial. I could barely talk to my client. And one of the many charges, unlawful use of a weapon, he had a switchblade. And when they called the case, the judge had the evidence and he was playing with the switchblade. Pushed the button, the blade would pop out, then he'd put it back in there. And then he looked at the prosecutor and said, "What's wrong with this? I don't see any problems." So I knew I was going to win that case. So the system is just broken. And it becomes like a game. It's sort of like playing poker or Monopoly. And sometimes guilt, innocence, right, wrong, really doesn't always affect the outcome of a case. And it's unfortunate. That's why there are so many innocent men in prison, and so many guilty men not. And I'll give you a good example of a burglary case I tried in front of Judge Schiller. That's, there's a family lawyer, and his brother was a judge at 26th in California. And I had a very bizarre burglary case in front of him. And my client had no money, and I didn't know if he was innocent or guilty, because he was always talking to me in profanity and jibber jabber, and I was afraid to put him on the stand. I even asked him, I said, you got to let me know if you're innocent or guilty. I'm not going to tell anyone, but I have to know how to handle this case. And I couldn't get a straight answer out of him. Well, his co-defendant, I was convinced was innocent. It just happened to be a guy in the neighborhood walking around at the wrong time, and he fit the profile of a burglar, of a criminal, because he looked the way he fit the profile. So the police just picked him up and arrested him and handcuffed him. I don't think this guy did anything wrong. He was just sort of an idiot. All right? So he got arrested. I couldn't represent both defendants because there was a conflict. So I represented my client, and another attorney represented the guy who I don't see how he could have committed that crime. And that was a very winnable case. My case was a mess because there were two eyewitnesses, a Chicago police officer and the owner of the clothing store. Both of them claimed they were eyewitnesses and saw my client commit the burglary. And I tried the case because I couldn't work out a plea agreement because the state was out of control. They thought they had the guy convicted, so they wanted prison time. So I figured I have no choice to try it. And I knew I couldn't put my client on the stand because I didn't know what he would say. I don't even know if he'd give his right name. So I kept him off the stand.